Hi everybody, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our AI Summit, featuring executives from top tech companies revolutionizing the world as we speak. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Erez Eisenstadt. Erez.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you.
So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Omer Keilaf, co-founder and CEO of Innoviz, a company that revolutionizing the autonomous vehicle industry with cutting-edge LiDAR technology and advanced perception solutions. Most recently, they announced new partnership with none other than NVIDIA. And besides leading this cutting-edge company, Omer is mostly known for his undercover role in Fauda, but we'll get to it later on. So, Omer, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, Omer, I thought to start with a very interesting question. So, you founded a company, but you weren't the typical car or Formula One fanatic, right? So, I wanted to ask, what led you to focus on this particular problem in the auto industry, especially when we heard that you had other 20 potential startup ideas?
Right. When I decided to step out from the previous startup I was working on, I had around 26 ideas that I kept in my drawer, and Innoviz was actually just one of them. I think maybe number 17 or 18. I actually came across that list just a short while ago. It was nice to look at it. I think the reason that I decided to focus on Innoviz was the very good mix between the level of complexity which I was looking to dive into. I think the right, I would say, uniqueness in terms of the technologies that were required to be developed, along with my personal experience developing different technologies in other startups and other places. And I think the third, which goes to even today, is how am I personally involved with my wish that this technology would come to life. And I think every one of us is experiencing mobility on a day-to-day. We still hear really bad news from time to time. I come from a family where my older sister was involved in a very serious accident when I was a young boy. And I think it makes me very much aware on the importance of being able to solve this problem. And I think this is what keeps me motivated even after so many years now in a very tough industry, in a very tough environment, but still being able to push and bring the company to where it is today.
Very inspiring indeed. And as you mentioned, LiDAR technology is not the most straightforward technology to build from the get-go. People often talk about garage mode when they start a startup, right? And you literally started in one, in a deep tech innovation. But how do you know the moment when you can say, you know what, I got the product and it's time to engage with real customers?
Actually, my story is a bit a crazy one. So I had an idea in my mind, which I kept for, I think, almost 5 years before I started Innoviz. That was part of the list of ideas. When I decided that I will start talking with investors, was basically from day one, because knowing exactly how you're going to solve it is less important than the fact that you are confident that this problem is a must to be solved. And I've dealt with complexities in different technologies that people would consider imaginable or impossible to be solved. And I think that's what I brought to the table. My experience with dealing with uncertainties, dealing with the question of to be committed to something even if you don't really know how exactly you're going to solve it. And therefore, I wasn't really there. I didn't know how to solve the problem when I started the company. I started the company and started talking with customers maybe just a month or two after I started Innoviz and raised money, built a team. And it took us maybe 6 months later to really get to a point that we know exactly how we're going to solve it. You can imagine it was a huge blue ocean clean table. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty that I think most people would not enjoy, because as a CEO of a company, you want to see execution, you want to see your plan come to life and things being done. And being in that vertigo of kind of going around and starting fresh with several concepts and really get to the point that you're confident that you know exactly what you're going to do to take so long, it's a very unbearable situation to be at. And you need to take into account that you need to also give that confidence to your team. Meanwhile, I mean, maybe you as the CEO, you're responsible to bear that uncertainty. You need also to be aware that your team can withstand that roller coaster. And I think the fact that we chose a problem that was clearly important to everyone, they were willing to undergo that period together. But you can imagine that when you are one person that works at home in a garage mode, like you're saying, and trying to deal with this uncertainty, as one person, you can only go as far. And when you have around the table your A team, we were around 18 people that I did like an Ocean 11 project, built the best team from the different disciplinaries. And we sat around the table for 6 months, really playing around the table with different concepts. And you can imagine that when you have 18 people that are doing so on a day-to-day, having a clean sheet, like everyone comes with ideas, that can bring you to a different place. And I think one of the things that people do wrong is being convinced that the way you thought yourself how to do things, you owe it to the team to take a certain time and judge whether the way that you thought of how to do things is really the best way. Because as I said, eventually 18 people can bring much more together. And I think that was something I'm very thankful about, that my investors were patient and gave me that quiet period when I told them that I need 6 months to do the right due diligence, start from scratch, and make sure we're doing the right thing. And that's what led us to where we started our journey only around, I think, 6 or 7 months after I started the company.
It's definitely required a leap of faith from the investors, but fortune favors the bold, as they say. And when you started developing the next generation of LiDAR, can you share with us what was the biggest engineering challenge and how did you overcome it? Because I know, for example, that at the early days of Innoviz, you had something like 80 patents, right?
I think today we have several hundreds, but at some point of time when we realized what exactly our customers are looking for, we will not be able to do it if we will just integrate off-the-shelf technologies that are mature enough and just build a system based on existing chips and optics and lasers. There was a gap of several orders of magnitude between LiDARs that you will be able to build by using technologies that are available and what customers really need. And I think the real moment where things started to be interesting and I think the disruption started to be created was the point that we told the team, do not develop a technology or a product based on technologies that you are familiar with or available. Let's start to study which kind of technologies are in development, research that is done in different places, and try to see if we can use this research and basically bring these technologies to maturity by the time that we need to have the product working. Now, as a startup, one of your resources is obviously the money you raise or the team that you build, but the other resource that you need to manage carefully is the time to market. And this is important because if, for example, in 2016, when I started the company, I had to bring a product that needs to go to mass production in 2017, when everyone thought autonomous driving would be widely used, you can imagine that my ability to really develop core technologies was limited. But because we realized that this market will take a few more years, we knew that we have some time to start developing some core technologies that are needed. Now, it's obviously something you need to balance. You cannot go into a rabbit hole and decide to develop technologies that will take 20 years and then run out of money, come out of that tunnel and look back and realize you lost your opportunity. There needs to be a balance. And I think the part when we decided that we're going to look on technologies that are less mature was really a revelation, an opportunity for us to identify things that we can adopt. We used in our product technologies that were not assumed to be relevant to our market. For example, the detector that we used in our LiDAR was actually a technology that was still used in medical applications, in cities. So these are very unique, I would say, techniques for developing such sensors, and it was never used for this application. And we found a very interesting working point that if we can take this technology and change it to benefit from some of its characteristics in our product, we will be able to gain something meaningful. In order to do that, we also had to develop another chip that's basically the combination of using the right scanner, the very specific laser, the very specific detector. The combination of these will provide us the trade-off that can give us that several of order of magnitudes that we were looking for. Now, you can imagine that for a young company, that a startup that decides to develop 3 different types of chips, different types of technologies, optics, hardware, it's a huge risk that you're taking. It's different than a company that says, okay, I'll develop a very unique capability around a very specific technology. Here we had to develop several different technologies in different areas all together. That obviously means that we took a big risk as a company. And I remember when we concluded on what are the different technologies that we will need to develop in parallel, I remember on one side, you're happy because you feel that if you're able to get these technologies to work, then you can actually meet the requirements of your customer. On the other hand, I remember one of the team members coming to me at that point, and he stepped into my room and he closed the door and he told me, Omer, you are crazy. There is no chance in the world that all the stars will align and we will be able to develop all of these crazy technologies without missing at least one of them, and eventually we won't be able to build a system. And I remember that moment because it was a reality check. Are we doing the right thing? Are we not maybe doing something too risky? And I told him something at that moment, and it's interesting because I still feel that way very strongly on kind of the mindset of how you should approach solving a problem. And I was part of developing different technologies that were considered really impossible. And the number of times that I've faced a concrete wall and eventually we were able to solve it, there was always one common thing between them. There was a team that was capable and was committed. That's the only thing that you really need to solve a very difficult problem. And I remember when I told him, look, we can decide to develop a product that is simpler, but does not really fulfill the needs of our customers. And it might be a lower risk to develop it, but it is significant higher risk that eventually it's meaningful. And I'm not willing to spend the time of all of the best engineers I know in the next coming years to develop something that nobody believes in. And whenever we'll face the next opportunity that will have a problem to solve, if people don't really believe it matters, they will not solve it. And if they feel they have to solve it because this is a problem that must be solved, they will solve it. And I remember that I'm telling him that I'm not willing to make a decision to fail. I'm willing to take the risk and succeed. He stepped out of the room, and all I wanted to do is go to throw up in the toilet, because one of my best engineers just told me that we're going to be screwed. So that was a very tough moment. And since then, I can tell you that there were too many times where I felt everything is going to crash, but eventually we didn't. And it was nothing but the fact that we had the right people around the table that were really, really committed and knew it's too important to give up.
Absolutely, and it's actually a great segue for my next question. We hosted a bunch of entrepreneurs from the cyber world, and there it's more straightforward. You could start even with smaller company to start selling your product and then move to the big enterprise. But with Innoviz, it's actually interesting because one of your biggest deal really at the beginning of the way was winning BMW, and even later you won the Volkswagen deal. So I was just wondering, in those two cases, what gave you the upper hand against certainly more established players out there?
It's crazy. Today, when I think about how eventually we were awarded the first win with BMW, I think it doesn't make sense. We didn't have any product working. We had a very good team with a very good plan, and we were awarded for serious production into a vehicle that planned to be launched in a few years. And it's crazy because we didn't have any of the chips yet available. Everything was basically on PowerPoint. And that's really, really crazy compared to today when we're competing on programs, the level of maturity. So I think that what really allowed us to be awarded BMW at the time was the fact that they spent a lot of time with our engineers. And I think that they were convinced by our strategy, that they believed that the way we solve it is the right way. And they were convinced by the level of, I would say, professionalism of the engineers and their ability to fulfill what we are saying. I think those are the only reasons I can imagine beyond my nice look. I'm kidding. But I think that was really the case. And I think with Volkswagen, it was a bit different. We were already a more mature company. Volkswagen picked us because we had the experience to bring a product to automotive already at the time. So we were able to show off our experience. And I think also from the fact that we already offered them a second generation, which baked in a lot of learnings that we were able to reflect. And the third, I think that and they said it themselves, they also understand that developing requires a different mindset from your partners. And when you are working with a traditional car supplier, you can imagine it comes with a different set of skills and willingness to be flexible. This is our future. If another traditional tier one who develops 20 other products, if this one fails, that's okay. They have other businesses. And let's say that if they have a problem now with their camera program, they will shift more resources there because they are making more money on these programs because the numbers are higher. That's not something that we will ever do in a program because the LiDAR is the product, the company. So we'll give 100% of our attention. We will not tell the customer that if there is a problem, it's his problem and it's not our problem. We need this to work. We need the car to work well. This is something they told us when we were selected.
And they definitely made a good choice. I remember even going to the last CES conference in Las Vegas, and I saw your big booth out there. So it seems very cool. And I want now to talk about the industry landscape and competition, because now we see two camps out there, the Elon camp with Tesla and Waymo on the other side. While Tesla is more into cameras now, although they actually started with LiDAR, it seems that Waymo is so adamant on LiDAR. Do you think these two worlds could coexist with each other?
I see it a bit different because it's not just Waymo versus Tesla. It's basically any car company versus Tesla. The LiDAR camp is significantly bigger. And to be honest, as much as Elon wants to project his decision on a technical perspective, eventually he's talking out of position. He has chosen his path 10 years ago and he's committed to it. And therefore, he's trying to find some arguments to explain to his investors why he thinks he's right. And he knows that if he will need to climb down the tree, it will be a tremendous loss to his company, money-wise, reputation-wise, etc. And therefore, it's beneficial for him to throw mud, you can say, on the space. Reality is that he's changed his story from time to time. He started by talking about cost and availability. He recognized already that's not the case. He just recently gave a different explanation to his position, which I actually found very confusing and very surprised. He said that using a LiDAR and camera adds complexity because it might be a case where they disagree. Now, that's kind of the reason why you add another sensor, because at some point you might get to a situation where one of the sensors is unable to see well. And this is exactly where you need to use a LiDAR, not a good reason why not to use one. Eventually, LiDAR is actually much more resilient than a camera. If I had to choose one, I would choose a LiDAR and not a camera. Waymo talks a lot about their, I would say, LiDAR-centric architecture. I had discussions with them where they told me that 90% of their neural network decisions are based primarily on LiDAR. So I think it's a nice topic to talk about because anything associated with Elon Musk is actually creating news, which is great, by the way, I think also for the LiDAR space. But the reality is actually much more clear. There is no other car manufacturer out there who is trying to develop an autonomous vehicle without a LiDAR. It won't happen. I think Elon knows that as well, but he's just waiting for the right moment to do this transition.
And I actually done my last summer internship at San Francisco, and it was amazing to see Waymo on the street. It seems like really cutting edge company with all the LiDAR detectors on top of the car. And it actually makes sense. Let's say you have a fog or heavy rain. So with LiDAR, you can actually interpret the vicinity in the best possible way. And I want now to move on to the last question before I pass the mic to Erez. So Innoviz is mostly known for collaboration with automakers, right? But your technology could play a bigger role even in healthcare, metaverse, or even space exploration. Maybe you could collaborate with Elon. So do you see this as a real future direction with Innoviz 360?
I think in 10 years from now, we will ask ourselves how we didn't see this much more clearly. Because, look, LiDAR is somehow heard as a scientific tool, like a spectrometer, but eventually it's a camera. It's a 3D camera. And maybe 50 years ago, you would see a cameraman who holds a camera with him and goes. You wouldn't imagine it to be a consumer application. Today, it's everywhere, right? We live in a 3D world, and therefore using a 3D camera is something that we'll find in many more places than today that we are aware of. You talked about metaverse, and I think when people talk about augmented reality, it needs to have 3D understanding. In order to position objects in the scene, you need to have a very good 3D understanding of it. You need to capture it. We are now having this discussion through screens that are 2D, right? We are used to look at television in 2D, mobile phones are 2D. In the future, it won't be the case. I mean, if you ever used virtual reality goggles, Oculus, etc., that's actually the first time that people are able to consume 3D content, right? It's a 3D digital information that we are able to consume. And today, most of the data that is available in these applications are synthetic because there are no good 3D cameras. But you can imagine that in the future, and it's not very far from us, you will use a 3D camera or a LiDAR to capture a live scene, maybe a soccer game, maybe a concert. and you will be able to see the data. You'll see the soccer game from the point of view of the goalkeeper, and you will be able to walk around on the field and look on your concert performer on the stage. And I think it's pretty clear that this is doable, and therefore it's probably will happen. The only thing you really need to do is to tie between a good 3D camera and a virtual reality or augmented reality device. So I think I gave you a glimpse, a spark moment of how the future would look like. And now going back into automotive, LiDARs, autonomous driving, I think it's clear why 3D sensing is not limited to autonomous driving. We live in a 3D world, so using a spatial understanding sensor is something that you'll find useful basically anywhere. And therefore, I don't really think it ends there. And we obviously continue to develop the next generations of LiDARs or 3D cameras, and they will become smaller, cheaper, better. The image quality, it's going to be a consumer technology, not just a vehicle one. So it's great to see the progress that was made over the last decade, and I'm sure that over the next one, it's going to be unimaginable in the way that it's going to be improved and available to everyone. So yeah, it's going to be everywhere.
It's certainly going to be fun and interesting to see it. I mean, I'm a big soccer fan, so just to imagine I don't know, in Camp Nou, Santiago Bernabeu, and watch games. It seems you're like one of the players. Seems sci-fi for me. And Omer, I got a bunch of more questions to ask you, but Erez is also fantastic question. So Erez, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yossi. And Omer, actually, my question kind of connects to what Yossi was saying. We were talking about the different application of LiDAR in different industries, but there's another thing to consider when, for example, when you deploy the LiDAR sensor for Chinese ports and the maritime industry that you shortly mentioned that I've actually used. And we're working in different geographies. Do you need to adapt the technology to local needs, or is it mostly the same everywhere?
The technology works the same, and most of the, I would say, modifications that are needed between different applications is the user experience or the analytics that you want to extract from the sensor. Whether you're driving in a car or you want to be able to detect someone who intrudes your field, you look for different things. But the physics is the same, right? So eventually the way the sensor operates is the same. Depends on the user, whether it's a car that needs to make driving decision and needs to be able to predict where things might be in a few seconds. There are other applications where you just need to count people or make sure that they don't go into areas or classify types of vehicle for traffic lights, etc. So the technology is the same, the interfaces might be different, and the software analysis is different, but the baseline is more of the same.
And when we're talking about more the software side of it, so Michael Kagan from NVIDIA told us that simulation physics is the next big AI application. And at CES, Jensen also highlighted the physical AI, and NVIDIA announced they're integrating Innoviz perception software in the Drive AGX and Orin. How does that shape your future roadmap?
Let's talk about NVIDIA. There is a product called Omniverse that NVIDIA is developing. Omniverse is the key for NVIDIA success in automotive. If you compare NVIDIA to maybe Mobileye or Waymo, you can argue that they have more mileage on the road than NVIDIA. And the key for the success of NVIDIA relies on their ability to emulate kilometers by using software. Because if they will get to a real physical model that can accelerate the way they collect kilometers because they have a better simulation, a real lifelike ability to sample the world and train your algorithms based on a better simulation, they can leapfrog the years of driving and testing that was done by others. So working closely with the sensor team that has very good understanding on the physical behavior and can give you an accurate model that you can compute into the simulation is a must. And every LiDAR has different behaviors because the physical layer of the system is highly dependent on its design. And therefore, you need to work hand in hand with a company that you have good transparency and good understanding of how things could be emulated. And you need to take into account not just the, I would say, the nominal behavior of the sensor, also the edge cases, the temperature variations, the mechanical tolerances, the assembly tolerances, and all of these needs to be baked into the model. So whenever you are running the Omniverse based on a physical model of the light, it will be sufficient and not require them to spend unnecessary time on the road. So this is key for NVIDIA. They need to prove for themselves, and I think also for the OEMs, that the Omniverse is sufficient in terms of doing this validation.
We can see that the physical AI is definitely growing a lot. And going with the AI, has it dramatically changed the LiDAR space? And where do you see the biggest impact? Perhaps like maybe opening a new market that a few years ago it wasn't obvious that the industry is going that way?
There are things that I cannot talk about, which are interesting, but I think there are very interesting, I would say, functions or capabilities that you can benefit from the use of AI and LiDAR. Things that I can talk broadly and say it's good. I'll say the following. Look, there are companies who are doing end-to-end AI. When I'm talking about end-to-end, is eventually there is a software stack that usually in a car is divided between the LiDAR, the perception layer of the sensors, the sensor fusion, the driving decision, driving policies, blah, blah, blah. There are like many, many layers. This is one way to think about it. And then you have also end-to-end, connecting the sensors to one big brain that you train, and basically having sensor to actuation, one block. There is plus and minuses to the different approaches. You see different companies going in different directions, and it looks like the end-to-end is something that became slightly popular recently, and it also helping some newcomers to step into this because it simplifies in a way the development processes. But again, other than that, obviously AI is nice, but what really is important is data. And you can have very good AI, but AI would be as good as the data you are using. And the better the data, you can create higher end features. And maybe what I want to say here, a LiDAR eventually is digitalizing the physical world, right? And this is something that, there were many years that people talked about HD maps, etc., but eventually having a very accurate way to capture the physical world gives you some really interesting ideas where AI or generative AI can create very interesting features.
Thank you. Actually, now I would like to move to a more rapid fire questions, more general, regardless of the topic, and just get your thoughts on it.
Wednesday. I just said something, I don't know. Okay.
So what would be one piece of advice you'd give an entrepreneur building a deep tech startup?
I would tell him that he's heading to a very, very tough journey, but a very rewarding one.
Absolutely. Who's been the mentor that impacted you the most, and what lesson stuck with you?
The person that really helped me in the first days was Zohar Zisapel. He was my first investor, and I think the person who trusted me doing this. I really appreciated everything he could offer. He was one of a kind, really. Was really one of a kind, and unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but was a really unique person. Very smart, but modest person. So for me, it was a role model. And what I've learned from my journey is that when it comes to dealing with customers, it's really, really important that, even though startups, they need the customer, right? They need the validation. They need, sometimes a big project is everything you need to become successful. And the customers, they know it, but they need you too. And sometimes you need to draw the red lines, because in terms of negotiation, sometimes you need to set a red line and challenge the customer to accept the deal as it is. and be willing to walk away if needed. It saves a lot of time, and you need to be ready to understand where, even though it's a great deal, when it stops becoming very fruitful and just wasting your time. So I think sometimes you need to be willing to walk the table. And I've used it several times, and I'm happy I've done it.
This advice can definitely save you a lot of time and money. What keeps you personally motivated through long cycles and specifically the automotive industry and through setbacks?
Yeah, that's something I get asked a lot. Look, it's a team. It's not about me. I think eventually I have a team around me. I'm here to allow the team to succeed. It doesn't matter if I'm happy, if I'm sad, if I'm angry. It's not something I really care so much about. I mean, I care, of course, but eventually I see it as a team mission. And therefore, whenever I'm thinking about this is something that I need to do for the success of the team, then it's enough for me.
Okay, and if you weren't running Innoviz, what did you do? What would you be doing? Any other profession in mind?
If I wouldn't do Innoviz, my child dream was to develop games for computers.
Yeah, definitely very different, but I can see the correlation.
I was a geek. I liked playing games, so
Yeah. Any special hobbies or routines outside of work that help you recharge?
I play with my kids sometimes when sometimes. I do creative stuff with my kids. That's something I enjoy. We build stuff.
Nice. Very important from, I guess, both sides.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm passing back to Yossi.
Omer, thank you so much. And one last question, and maybe the most important one. What is your favorite movie or even a series? And can you tell us what actually brought you to Fauda? And are we going to see you reprise your role soon in the next season?
So I think that we owe an explanation for the audience why Fauda. So people might recognize me and don't know from where. But yeah, I participated in season 2, chapter 2 of Fauda. And don't look for me, you will not find it. It's very, very difficult to see it. But nevertheless, a very important milestone in the series' life. I was actually also invited again to season 4, but I was sick in Corona, so I couldn't make it. I'm still in discussion with the crew, and I don't know if everything going around, if there will be another series, but I'm sure that if there will be another opportunity, I'll be called. So let's see.
Absolutely. So, Omer, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure. Masterclass of entrepreneurship. I mean, the deep tech and specifically the LiDAR space is super interesting and fascinating to see what is going to be next. So thank you. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other amazing episodes coming up. The chairman of Qualcomm, COO of Box, Taboola, and even a couple of VCs like Andreessen Horowitz, Index Ventures. So stay tuned.